The signal arrived without warning, without sound, without mercy. Every screen on Earth went black at the same instant, from the largest billboards in neon cities to the smallest phones held in trembling hands. Satellites froze in orbit. Radios filled with static and then silence. For 3 long seconds, the world held its breath. Then the message began. Not loud, not angry, but calm and absolute, spoken in every human language at once, layered perfectly so no one could escape understanding it. The voice did not belong to a man or a woman. It had no emotion, yet it carried power. It announced that Earth had been identified, categorized, and processed. Humanity was informed that it was now in a state of formal war with the Galactic Trade Authority, a coalition so vast that its name alone caused panic among those who understood what it meant. The message did not mention honor or conquest or glory. It spoke of violations, unpaid transit fees, unauthorized expansion, and repeated failures to comply with interstellar economic law. Before anyone could respond, the signal ended, and the screens went dark again. Panic followed instantly. Governments scrambled, militaries went to full alert, and emergency sirens wailed across continents. Fighter jets were launched into empty skies. Nuclear submarines received coded orders that made seasoned commanders swallow hard. News anchors spoke rapidly, voices shaking as they repeated the same words over and over, trying to explain the impossible. War had been declared on Earth, not by a nation, not by an ideology, but by something far larger and far colder. People filled the streets, looking up, expecting to see alien ships appear through the clouds at any moment. Parents held children tightly. Old soldiers stared at the horizon, knowing that no training on Earth had prepared them for this. Inside command centers buried deep beneath mountains, leaders argued in raised voices. Some demanded immediate retaliation, others called for silence and observation. Scientists replayed the message again and again, analyzing every word, every pause. Linguists noticed something strange. The phrasing was not like a threat. There was no promise of destruction, no boasting of superior weapons. It sounded more like a notice, like a document read aloud. Economists, called in as an afterthought, began to exchange uneasy glances. The message used terms that belonged in contracts, not battlefields. Compliance, fees, jurisdiction, accounting periods. One analyst quietly said what no one wanted to hear. This did not sound like an invasion. It sounded like an audit. Far above Earth, beyond the edge of the solar system, the alien fleet waited. It was vast beyond human imagination, ships arranged in perfect geometric patterns, their hulls marked with symbols of authority and ownership. To them, this was routine. Thousands of civilizations had received similar notices. Most responded with fear, some with anger, a few with resistance that ended quickly and badly. The authority did not hate, it processed. War, to them, was not emotion. It was enforcement. Earth was simply another entry in a ledger that had grown too large to ignore. Back on Earth, as fear spread like fire, one man sat alone in a quiet office, far from bunkers and generals. The building was ordinary, gray, and almost forgotten, part of an international financial oversight agency that rarely made headlines. The man watched the replay of the alien message on a small screen, his face unreadable. He did not panic. He did not curse. Instead, he leaned forward, listening closely, eyes narrowing at specific phrases. When the message ended, he replayed it again, slower this time. Noticed the structure, the order, the careful listing of alleged violations. Felt something unexpected rise in his chest. Recognition. He stood up, walked to a shelf, and pulled out a thick manual filled with tabs and notes. It was not a weapon. It was not classified. It was tax law, international and complex, built over decades of human arguments and compromises. As the world outside prepared for war, the man whispered a simple sentence to the empty room. They made a mistake. They think this is about force. Within hours, Earth's leaders demanded options. Weapons were useless against an enemy that had not yet fired a shot. Diplomacy channels were opened, then closed when no response came. The alien fleet waited patiently, confident that fear would do the work for them. They had given Earth time, as protocol required. Time to surrender. Time to prepare. Then something unexpected happened. A single transmission was sent from Earth. It was not encrypted with military codes, did not carry threats or pleas. It was calm, clear, and precise. It identified the sender as a representative of Earth's financial authority. The message acknowledged receipt of the war declaration and politely requested supporting documentation, proof of legal authority, records of prior notices, detailed breakdowns of the alleged fees owed. It ended with a simple statement. Until such documentation was provided, the declaration could not be recognized as valid. On the bridge of the alien command vessel, silence followed. Officers exchanged confused signals. This was new. No civilization had ever asked this. One commander reread the message, certain there had been an error in translation, a request, not for mercy, not for time, for paperwork. On Earth, the man returned to his desk and began preparing questions. Outside, the world still trembled, unaware that the first move in the greatest war in human history had already been made. Not with fire, but with words, logic, and the quiet confidence of a species that had learned, through centuries of struggle, that systems could be stronger than armies. The alien command did not respond at first, and that silence was heavier than any threat. Across Earth, people waited, watching skies that remained empty, listening to news channels that filled the time with speculation and fear. Military forces stayed at maximum readiness, fingers tight on triggers, while politicians argued about whether the message sent from Earth had been a mistake or madness. Many believed the man who sent it had doomed the planet, that asking questions instead of preparing weapons was weakness. But the man himself remained calm, sitting in the same quiet office, reading, highlighting, and organizing documents, as if this were just another difficult case. He understood something most did not. Any system that declared war using legal language was bound by its own rules, and rules once acknowledged could be tested. When the alien reply finally came, it did not appear on every screen. It was sent only to the same office that had contacted them first. The message was shorter, sharper, and clearly irritated. The Galactic Trade Authority stated that its jurisdiction was absolute and self-evident, that its authority had never been questioned, and that Earth's request was unnecessary. The man read it carefully, then smiled faintly. He drafted his response slowly, choosing each word with care. He thanked them for their reply, acknowledged their claim of authority, and then asked again, politely, for the legal basis of that authority, as it applied to Earth. He cited examples from the message itself, pointing out references to compliance frameworks and enforcement protocols. He ended by reminding them that enforcement without jurisdiction was invalid under most recognized systems of law. Then he sent it. On the alien flagship, confusion began to spread. The officers were trained for resistance, not for debate. Their systems flagged the human response as non-hostile, but non-compliant. Protocols looped. Automated advisors suggested escalation, but escalation required justification codes that now, strangely, demanded verification. The authorities' database searched for Earth's entry, pulling records that had not been reviewed in centuries. The files were old, incomplete, translated through layers of assumptions. Earth had never been fully integrated into the system. It had been added automatically when human ships began leaving their solar system, flagged as a minor trade participant, expected to fall in line later. Later had arrived. The alien commander authorized a limited disclosure, sending what they believed would end the matter. It included summaries, references, and citations, so ancient that no one aboard the ship truly understood them. The documents arrived on Earth within seconds, and the man read them with growing interest. They were impressive, vast, and complex, but they were not complete. They referenced agreements Earth had never signed, trade lanes humans had never used, and fees calculated over timelines that did not match human calendars. He leaned back, eyes closing for a moment, then opened them with renewed focus. This was not an act of war. This was an audit nightmare. He sent another response, longer this time, listing discrepancies in simple language. He asked why Earth was being charged for routes it had never traveled. He questioned the conversion rates used to calculate value. He pointed out that several referenced agreements predated humanity's first radio transmission. His tone remained respectful, almost friendly, was not attacking, he was examining. With each question, the authorities' systems strained harder, forced to justify assumptions that had never been challenged. Inside the alien fleet, tension grew. Officers whispered to each other, their confidence shaken not by weapons, but by uncertainty. The authority prided itself on order. Chaos was the enemy, and now chaos was forming inside their own records. Some species within the alliance began to worry. If Earth could question the system, others might follow. Trade partners watched closely, monitoring the exchange with quiet interest. A war that dragged on meant instability, and instability was bad for profit. On Earth, something shifted. News of the exchange leaked, and fear slowly mixed with confusion. People expected explosions, not questions. Commentators mocked the idea at first, calling it foolish, but then experts began to speak. Economists, lawyers, and historians recognized the danger facing the aliens. Humanity had spent centuries fighting itself over rules, taxes, borders, and definitions. It had survived empires, collapses, and endless bureaucracy. This was familiar ground. The man received a third alien message, and this time, the tone had changed. It was no longer cold confidence. It was cautious. Authority requested clarification on Earth's legal frameworks, asking how humans define sovereignty, ownership, and compliance. The man laughed softly, not out of humor, but out of understanding. He replied with a summary, brief but dense, outlining how human systems worked, how consent mattered, how enforcement required agreement, and how any claim could be challenged. He attached thousands of pages of documentation, treaties, and examples, a small sample of humanity's legal history. As the data poured into alien systems, alarms began to sound. Processing loads spiked. Conflicting interpretations emerged. Different species within the authority used different standards. An Earth's challenge forced those differences into the open. Meetings were called. Arguments broke out. For the first time in living memory, the authority delayed enforcement not because of resistance, but because of doubt. On Earth, the skies remained empty, but the air felt different. The war had not ended, but it had changed shape. Humanity had not fired a shot, yet the enemy was no longer certain of victory. The man closed his files for the night and stood by the window, looking out at the city lights. He knew this was only the beginning. Questions led to more questions, and systems, once questioned, rarely survived unchanged. The delay inside the alien alliance did not go unnoticed, and what began as hesitation soon turned into strain. Entire divisions of the Galactic Trade Authority were redirected from war preparation to internal review, something that had not happened in thousands of cycles. The human documents flooded their systems, forcing translations, comparisons, and cross-checks that revealed uncomfortable truths. Trade routes overlapped without clear ownership. Fees had been calculated using outdated conversion standards. Some member species had quietly adjusted numbers to benefit themselves, trusting that no one would ever look closely. Now, because of a single human who refused to accept a declaration without proof, everything was being looked at all at once. The alien fleet remained in position, but its purpose began to blur. Supply ships delayed deliveries, while payment responsibilities were argued. Logistics officers argued with financial overseers. War planners demanded action, but accountants demanded clarity. Every request for fuel, weapons, maintenance, or crew rotation triggered a review, and every review uncovered another inconsistency. The authority's strength had always come from unity and trust in the system, and now that trust was cracking. Some species began to ask quiet questions of their own, wondering how much they had paid over the centuries and how much others had avoided paying entirely. On Earth, the man watched the responses grow longer and more uncertain. The authority now asked for extensions, citing internal verification processes. He granted them politely, knowing exactly what those processes would uncover. He escalated carefully, not by threatening, but by requesting broader transparency. He asked for full audit trails, revenue allocation models, and enforcement criteria across all member species. Each request was reasonable. Each one was devastating. Humanity had learned long ago that fairness, once demanded, could destroy corrupt systems faster than violence ever could. News of the growing confusion spread across the galaxy. Neutral civilizations observed the exchange with rising interest. and some quietly paused payments to the authority, citing pending clarification of standards. That single action sent shockwaves through interstellar markets. Credits stalled, contracts froze, insurance rates spiked. The authority issued firm statements insisting everything was under control, but their own internal channels told a different story. Emergency councils were formed, and old alliances strained as accusations began to fly. Who approved this fee? Who changed that rule? Who signed agreements no longer remembered? The alien commander responsible for Earth's enforcement sat in silence as reports piled up. This was not how wars were supposed to go. There were no explosions, no heroic stands, no clear enemy to defeat. The humans were not hiding or surrendering. They were simply asking questions, and every question made the authority weaker. When the commander suggested ignoring the audit and proceeding with force, the response from higher oversight was immediate and firm. Enforcement without validated authority would expose the entire system to legal collapse. War, it seemed, had rules even they could not break. Earth's militaries remained ready, but their role shifted from defense to patience. Generals who once demanded action now understood the strategy, even if they did not fully like it. Humanity's strength was not just in weapons, but in endurance. It could wait. It had waited through long wars, cold wars, and endless negotiations. Time, in this case, favored the side willing to let the system unravel itself. The man received a private message, marked with an urgency he had not seen before. A senior authority representative requested a direct dialogue, acknowledging procedural complications and asking whether Earth would consider a temporary suspension of the audit in exchange for reduced enforcement. The man read the message twice, then shook his head slowly. He replied that Earth could not accept partial compliance, and that any suspension would require full disclosure of all relevant records. He ended with a sentence that carried no anger, only certainty. Systems must be fair to survive. Inside the alien alliance, that response was the breaking point. Smaller member species began openly challenging the authorities' leadership, demanding refunds and revisions. Long-hidden debts surfaced. Entire enforcement fleets were grounded because funding approvals could not be validated. The war economy collapsed inward, consuming itself. The idea of attacking Earth became absurd when the authority could barely agree on who would pay for the fuel. On Earth, the mood shifted from fear to disbelief. People watched as analysts explained what was happening, how the greatest force in the galaxy was being dismantled by its own paperwork. The idea spread quietly, almost humorously at first, then with growing pride. Humanity had not been chosen for war because it was weak. It had been chosen because the system assumed it would not resist in the right way. That assumption had been wrong. The man stood once more by his office window, watching the city below move as it always had, lights glowing, people living, unaware of how close destruction had come. He knew the authority would not recover quickly, and he knew they would have to make a choice soon, accept change or lose control entirely. He closed his files, already preparing for the next phase, because audits did not end when mistakes were found. They ended when systems were rebuilt. Far beyond Earth, the alien fleet remained motionless, not because it was waiting to strike, but because it no longer knew if it was allowed to. The war had not been won, but it had been transformed into something far more dangerous to those who ruled by unquestioned authority. And for the first time, the galaxy understood that humans did not need fleets to defend themselves. They only needed to be invited to read the fine print. The collapse reached a point where even denial was no longer possible, and the Galactic Trade Authority faced a reality it had never prepared for. Entire sectors of its administration were frozen, not by enemy fire, but by internal injunctions triggered automatically by unresolved disputes. Enforcement fleets sat idle as payment authorizations failed to clear. Crews waited aboard massive warships, not knowing whether their service contracts were still valid or whether their fuel allocations technically belonged to another department. What had once been the most orderly power in the galaxy now existed in a state of procedural paralysis, trapped by the very rules that had allowed it to dominate for so long. A formal transmission was sent to Earth, no longer framed as an order or a warning, but as a request. The authority acknowledged that errors may have occurred in its classification of Earth and admitted that enforcement. Actions had been initiated without full verification. It proposed a mutual review committee, a way to quietly reset the situation and avoid wider consequences. The message carried subtle hints of urgency, a fear that if this process continued, the entire galactic economy might fracture. On Earth, the message was received by the same quiet office, and the same man read it without satisfaction or triumph. He saw it for what it was, an attempt to close the books before the truth spread any further. His response was firm but fair. Earth, he wrote, was willing to participate in a review, but not a closed one. Transparency was required. Records must be shared with all affected parties. Outstanding charges must be recalculated under a unified standard. And most importantly, the declaration of war must be formally withdrawn, acknowledged as invalid due to lack of jurisdiction. The man knew this was the moment where the authority would either accept change or risk complete collapse. He pressed send and leaned back, exhaling slowly, fully aware that the fate of two civilizations now rested on a ledger. The reaction inside the alien alliance was immediate and explosive. Some members supported the terms, seeing them as the only path to survival. Others resisted, furious that a newly discovered species had forced them into this position. Arguments turned into open accusations, and accusations into threats of secession. The authorities' leadership realized that refusing Earth now would not restore control. It would destroy what little remained. With no other option, they agreed. The declaration of war was withdrawn in a public broadcast across known space. The language was careful, but the meaning was clear. Earth had not been an enemy. It had been misclassified. The authority accepted responsibility for procedural failure and announced a comprehensive reform of its systems. Across the galaxy, reactions ranged from shock to relief. Worlds that had lived under quiet pressure for generations saw hope for the first time. Worlds that had benefited from the old system went silent. On Earth, the announcement was met with disbelief, then celebration. There had been no invasion, no battle, no heroic last stand. Humanity had survived its first contact war without losing a single city, a single ship, a single life. Leaders spoke to the public, explaining what had happened in simple terms. The galaxy had tried to enforce rules without consent, and humanity had refused to accept them. Not with violence, but with clarity. The mood shifted from fear to pride, a deep and steady confidence that spread across nations. The authority requested one final session with Earth's representative, and the man agreed. The meeting was brief. They discussed frameworks, standards, and future engagement. The authority asked carefully whether Earth would consider assisting with the reform process. The man paused before answering, said Earth did not seek power over others, but it believed systems should serve those within them, not control them. If the galaxy wanted help building something fair, humanity would participate. If not, Earth would remain independent. The authority accepted those terms without argument. When the meeting ended, the man closed his terminal and packed his things. There were no ceremonies, no medals, no public recognition. He returned his manuals to the shelf and turned off the office lights. Outside, the city moved on, unaware of how close it had come to annihilation. Unaware that its survival had been secured not by soldiers, but by someone who understood rules better than fear. Far across the galaxy, the alien fleet finally dispersed, not in retreat, but in reorganization. Ships returned to docks, crews reassigned, systems rewritten. The legend of Earth spread quickly, not as a world of warriors, but as a civilization that broke empires by asking them to explain themselves. A quiet warning traveled with the story, passed from species to species. Do not threaten humans lightly. Do not assume they will fight on your terms. They will read your laws, test your systems, and hold you to your own words. And on Earth, life continued, skies clear, cities bright, humanity unaware that it had just taught the galaxy a lesson it would never forget. In a universe ruled by force and fear, humans had proven that intelligence, patience, and defiance wrapped in calm reason could be the most powerful weapons of all.